UFC 300 is about a year away, and it's on track to be somewhere around early spring, which is going to be really fantastic. So I thought, hey, you know what? Why not? One of the biggest cards of all time, especially with UFC 200 being the kind of flop it was. What if I was in charge? What fights would I want to see put on UFC 300? We're going to talk about all of that in today's video, from the early prelims straight up to the main event. And you guys probably know what the main event is, but guys, we're going to talk about the whole card. We're going to build it today, and I'm going to tell you why I chose which fights. We're going to get into the video in just a second. Before we do, though, I do want to say hello, everybody, and welcome back to another video. If you are new here, my name is Kyle. I'm your guy with too many YouTube channels. Let's talk about this. So before we get into the card, I want to explain myself a little bit, because I was thinking about this, and this is something that I've always talked about with just the people around me, my friends. If the UFC wanted to make a really, really big card, something to the level of International Fight Week, something to the UFC 300, something like really, really special, why not have what they sometimes do with 6 fights on the main card? Sometimes we see that, sometimes we see six fights on the prelims. Why not have 6 fights on the early prelims, the prelims, and the main card? So if that's possible, just because we're having fun today, we're going to have 6 fights on each with some backup fighters. We're going to go from the early prelims all the way to the bottom, straight up to the main event. And I'd love to know what you guys think about my picks for the matchup. Afterwards, I did my best to choose like fighters that would still be champions and still like something that's kind of possible to come next year. You know what I mean? Of course, the champions will float around. Contenders will be in and out. So, of course, things can change. But as of right now, these are the best I could come up with, and I would absolutely love to see this card. Let's get into it. Starting off with the first fight on the early prelims, we have Bryce Mitchell versus the Korean Zombie. This fight would be absolutely fantastic. Actually, to be honest with you, it makes sense in division. We have no clue how long Bryce Mitchell's going to be off for. He's really, really hurt his back right now. Plus, the Korean Zombie, who doesn't love the Korean Zombie, right? If you want a UFC 300 card, you gotta have the Korean Zombie on it. The fans would be riling over this fight, and honestly, I don't know who I'd cheer for. This fight is fantastic for the matchup. Bryce Mitchell's in a spot where we don't know exactly where he sits at the top of the division. I actually think the matchup against Chan Sung Jung isn't a bad one. I actually don't know who I'd pick to win this fight. I'd probably lean towards Mitchell, but I don't know who I'd cheer for this fight. I actually don't want to see it now that I'm thinking about it, because I really like both these fighters. Next fight on the card, we have Polyana Viana versus Jillian Robertson. This actually does make sense in the division, and people both like to see Polyana Viana and Jillian Robertson. You got to have some WMMA fighters, so why not get the ones that are absolutely 100% for sure going to get the clicks in these two? Plus, they've been looking good in the division, so I feel like they could actually put on an okay fight. It'd be Polyana Viana, maybe she can knock around, or will Jillian Robertson do what she's been doing and putting on an absolute grappling clinic? This fight will get a lot of attention, especially if we're advertising UFC 300. You got to think about it this way. They would get numbers, man. And we want eyes on the early prelims. This is how you get them. Next fight on the early prelims, we have Paulo Costa, and he's fighting Sean Strickland. This is a fight that we've been wanting for a very long time, and you might be asking yourself, why is this on the early prelims? Because one, Paulo Costa does not deserve to be on the prelims or the main card. Early prelims, because we don't know if Paulo Costa were to sign this fight for UFC 300, he might go, hey, I'm not going to make weight. I'm not going to show up. I never signed to have this fight, and that fight could very well get canceled. So they're sticking around on the early prelims because that's what Paulo Costa deserves. Poor Sean Strickland, but this is a matchup that we've wanted to see for so long. The fight would be fireworks. I apologize if we can hear a train outside. The fight would be fireworks. The press conference would be absolutely amazing. Again, you got to think about the marketing for UFC 300. These two would bring so many eyes into it, and honestly, I don't know who I'd pick for the matchup. I'd kind of lean towards Costa, but Strickland I could see jabbing his face off. Plus, if you want absolute bangers, Strickland does have a way, and while I enjoy his fights, some people say he is a very, very boring fighter. Not even some people, a lot of people do say that. I enjoy it, but the early prelims actually does seem like a good spot, especially with the fights that are to come later. Next fight, Renato Moicano versus Drew Dober. Now, anytime Drew Dober is in a fight, you are asking for absolute fireworks. Drew Dober has never been in a boring fight, and Renato Moicano has been gaining some steam lately. If you threw this guy on a card like UFC 300, man, he has the potential to blow up and become a superstar. He had his moment already, and I was so heartbroken when he got injured, man, because I was so excited to see him again, because he was coming off of such a fantastic moment with amazing momentum with his whole clip with Moicano want money, and then now he's talking about like learning English on COD and stuff. Renato Moicano has the potential to break out and become a star, and to have him fight against somebody like Drew Dober, who no matter what will bring it, and no matter what, these two will clash and have an exciting fight. As much as I like Dober, Moicano, this could be his chance to have his moment. The fight's going to be amazing. The build-up's going to be amazing. People like Drew Dober, and people are really going behind Renato Moicano right now, so I really like this matchup, and especially for some attention on the early prelims. Next fight, early prelims, Ian Machado Gary, I should say, taking on Kevin Holland. Does this not make sense in the division? I would love to see this fight. Imagine these two going to war standing up. Ian Gary, potential superstar there, and been talking about wanting to fight on the undercard to a special somebody who has been on the thumbnail. I think that'd be great. Ian Gary has that potential to break out a little bit more. I don't know if he will, but the potential's there. Kind of like Moicano, but I don't believe he has as much potential as Moicano does. Regardless, Kevin Holland, always exciting. UFC fans, casuals too. Kevin Holland, there's always something like fun going on with Kevin Holland, whether it's at the press conference, backstage, the fight itself. Kevin Holland's just a nice showman. He's great at what he does. And these two going against each other, oh man, I don't know who would win that fight. That's a very, very interesting matchup by me. Well, I'm a good matchmaker, man. Closing up the early prelims, we have Tai Tuivasa. And who is Tai Tuivasa going to take on? He's taking on Chris Barnett. Now, does this make sense in the division? Not really. But I was thinking like, do I want Tai Tuivasa? I wanted to put Derek Lewis here. But man, Chris Barnett, again, you want to talk about exciting. Chris Barnett is one of the most exciting fighters in the UFC. Chris Barnett will get the crowd going, especially to end off the early prelims. Imagine the energy this dude could bring in. Tuivasa too. Tuivasa will probably win the fight. So imagine this. This is what I'm imagining. The card builds up, the music starts hitting, Chris Barnett walks out doing his thing, getting the crowd all hyped up. And don't get me wrong, it's going to be a decently close fight. Both guys will slug. Chris Barnett has the heart to potentially win. Who knows? So Chris Barnett's coming out there, riling up the crowd. Tai Tuivasa comes out, does the same thing, but not quite to the same extent. They get in the octagon, someone gets put out, and the round, it goes at least a round because Chris Barnett, man, I would imagine he'd lose this fight, but he has no quit in him. If Chris Barnett happened to pull it off, he's going to be doing some dancing, he's going to be doing some front flips, but Tai Tuivasa gets a solid Tai Tuivasa knockout, jumps on the cage, does a few shoeies. The crowd would be so hyped by the end of these early prelims, moving into the regular prelims. This is a fantastic fight. It's perfect placement in my eyes, and it doesn't really make sense in the division, but this fight would do exactly what you need to do for UFC 300. Moving on to the regular prelims, opening up the prelims, we have a rematch between Paddy, the Batty Pimlet, and Jared Gordon. Now, I thought about matching someone up against Paddy. Maybe somebody like Clay Guida. That was a serious thought of mine, but I was thinking about it at work today. I was like, no. People would like to see a rematch. There has been so much talk in the MMA community, especially among casuals too. Paddy brings in people. Paddy brings in eyes. And who knows how many more eyes he could potentially bring in now that he has a bunch of fans and a bunch of haters. He's kind of capturing that thing you need to do to become a really, really big star. Plus, if you want to talk next year, could be when Paddy Pimlet wants to come back, and Jared Gordon will be absolutely down to take that fight. Why would he not want to? No matter what happens in his next fights, he'll want to get that win back, and it's free eyes, free attention, fame. This matchup has chaos written all over it, whether you want to talk about the promo, press conference, they'd be bad blood, and probably they'd want to slug it out a little bit more. Paddy Pimlet walking out in general would drum up just chaos in the crowd. And Jared Gordon, I feel like, is the proper dance partner to have a rematch within this. So I really like this matchup. Paddy Pimlet versus Jared Gordon 2. Run it back, UFC 300. Next fight, because, and I'll give my explanation in a little bit, Erin Blanchfield versus Amanda Ribas. Both fighters on a roll. Erin Blanchfield would probably steamroll her. But it looks like they're going to do Valentina Shevchenko versus Alexa Grasso 2, and that was almost pretty much confirmed by Dana White. So if these girls are going to sit out for a little while, who knows when that matchup's going to get made, and who knows how much damage each fighter will take in that potential matchup. Erin Blanchfield has been open about, hey, I'll just fight. Amanda Ribas is probably down to get a top contender like Erin Blanchfield. Plus, you want the girls on the card that the guys will come and SIMP over. Got to use the nice words for YouTube. You know what I mean? We had that earlier with Polyana Viana, Jillian Robertson. She's been getting a lot of attention recently. Now, bringing Erin Blanchfield, Amanda Ribas, kind of doing the same thing, but with, at the same time, having talented fighters, because that's lacking a little bit in WMA. You know what I mean? So this would actually be a very good matchup. I would imagine Erin Blanchfield would stomp Amanda Ribas, but this fight would have some eyes on it. So this next fight, I'm being very selfish for this fight because this is a dream matchup of mine. We have Peter Yan versus Song Yadong. Enough said. Enough said. Imagine these two walking out, and both guys have their fan bases. Imagine the boxing match, the kickboxing match that these two would bring. The aggression that they bring, the technique that they bring. This is legitimately one of my dream fights right now. I don't think I really need to expand on it. The only problem is how much interest would it drum up among casuals? I feel like this is a fight you could throw in there, throw in the mix just for purely excitement, even if it doesn't bring a ton of outside attention. Yeah, you have China, you have Russia, but I don't know if these two are necessarily really, really big stars for people to come in, because we do have Song taken care of in the sense where we have another fighter who's a little bit bigger coming from the same place, but I don't want to give it away. I'm not sure how much Song Yidong attention he would bring. I don't know if he's necessarily a superstar yet. And Petr Yan is really a fan favorite among MMA hardcore fans. Petr Yan doesn't really get too much casual attention, and I feel like I'm talking you out of this fight. But imagine these two walking in the octagon together. This would be, so far out of everything that I talked about, by far the fight that I'm most excited for. The technique that they would display. I would love it. I would love it, and it makes sense in the division. Book that even without me making this UFC 300 card. I would love to see this fight. All right, guys, moving on in the prelims, we have Jim Miller, his retirement fight at UFC 300, like he always wanted. He is going to take on Clay Guida in a rematch. This has the potential to have one of those really wholesome moments like we saw, what was it, like a couple months ago, with two fighters retiring the octagon. Clay Guida probably wouldn't retire because he is crazy enough to keep fighting until he gets knocked out more and more and more. But Jim Miller has been very vocal about wanting to fight until UFC 300 because he's fought on 100, 200, and 300. Unfortunately, I would like to see Jim Miller on the main card, but that's just not feasible at all. I hope, man, when they actually build this card, I hope they put Jim Miller on it. That's all he wants. I feel like this fight would be a really, really huge respect to the veterans in the game. Two amazing veterans have done so much. Jim Miller is one of my favorite fighters of all time, and Clay Guida is up there too for me. So this fight would hurt my heart. I would cheer for Jim Miller. But this is a perfect matchup for him. It's a winnable matchup. It's a guy he's familiar with, a guy who he already beat. But Clay has been looking better than Jim Miller has in this most recent times in the UFC. But regardless, this is a fantastic fight, and it would hurt my heart to say goodbye to one or both of these absolute legends. Moving on, almost done closing up the prelims, we have Justin the Highlight Gaethje taking on Matt Frevola. Now, this is a toughie because I can't see Justin Gaethje taking this matchup against a guy who is so far down in the division. But Matt Frevola just looked fantastic, and he's been looking real good, just destroying some hype trains. Going in there, swinging, putting on some power. Justin Gaethje sells himself. It's guaranteed excitement. Put him against a guy with the fight style of Matt Frevola, and you have more chaos. This is like I was talking about. This is like the casual perspective, and I don't mean to call these fighters like they're casuals or anything. Of course, they are fantastic fighters. They could be champions one day. But I'm talking about how the hardcore fans would have loved enough said at Petr Yan and Song Yidong. Enough said with Justin Gaethje for the casuals. Enough said pairing him up against Matt Frevola. There we go. Enough said. These two would go at it. They would swing. Someone would go out. Perfect fight. Perfect matchup. You'd have to pay Justin Gaethje a little bit more because I would imagine he would not take this fight. But man, I would love to see it. Great matchup. Closing up the prelims, we have Matt Brown versus the return of Nate Diaz. Like I just talked about Jim Miller and Clay Guida, two legends of the sport. Matt Brown is one of my favorite fighters like Jim Miller. He's one of my favorite fighters of all time. I love Nate Diaz as well. Nate Diaz has been vocal that he wants to take at least one more fight. So why not put him at somebody, and I don't mean any disrespect to Matt Brown, why not put him against somebody who is also at the end of his career, somebody who is also a shell of his former self. And I know Matt Brown's coming off an amazing win. He definitely has more fight in him than Nate Diaz, but Matt Brown doesn't look the same. You could pair these guys up, it'd be a little bit more slower pace. Nate Diaz would always get the fans hyped up. Matt Brown, always exciting. You could have their final fight at UFC 300, and it could make for one of the most amazing retirements, amazing moments in UFC history. And honestly, this is a fight that I've always wanted to see the two paired up anyways. It's amazing that they never ran into each other. But man, Matt Brown versus Nate Diaz, that would be perfect. I wanted to throw it on the main card, but as I read off the main card for you guys, I think it's perfect to end the prelims. Moving on to the main card. All right, guys, open up the main card. Opening up the main card, we have Khamzat Chimaev. Who's Khamzat Chimaev going to take? He's going to take on Shavkat Rakhmonov. Hardcore fans, this is the fight that we all want to see. I want to see Khamzat fight a lot of people. I want to see Shavkat fight a lot of people. But I want to see these two fight each other. I would imagine Khamzat would edge him out. He just looks stronger. But man, this is a technical matchup that hardcore fans have been dying to see for so long. These two have been on a collision course, and now it's a little bit sad that Khamzat might go up to middleweight and take on somebody there. I hope to God we get to see this fight one day. And on the main card, I wanted to put Matt Brown versus Nick Diaz in this spot, but I feel like you just can't at this point not put Hamzat on the main card. This fight would be a technical war. I would absolutely love to see these two paired up. I would look forward to it almost as much as Petr Yan versus Song Yadong. Amazing matchup. I'm getting hyped for fights that don't even exist. All right, guys, top 5 fights. And this is where it's going to get a little bit dicey because I chose Sean O'Malley versus Chito Vera 2. Sean O'Malley could be the champion by then. And I understand Marlon Vera might be coming off of a loss. So you're going to have a guy who could be champion versus a guy who's coming off of a loss, maybe even another loss. If you want to pair him up against Yan, he loses that matchup. You know what I mean? But then again, I was like, you know what? First of all, this is hypothetical. Secondly, it's UFC 300. You could chalk it up to something really special. Hey, you know what? More title fights. Why not? It is the biggest card in UFC history, right? So I feel like we can get away with it. I was thinking about all the guys you could pair up Sean O'Malley with. Of course, he's going to fight Aljamain Sterling in August, so who knows what's going to happen there. But even if he's not champion, even if he loses to Sterling, which I think he will, why not pair him against Chito? The build-up for this fight would be crazy. Sean O'Malley, one of the biggest stars that is in the making right now. Give him his chance on the spotlight for UFC 300. It's not like we need to give him a chance anymore. The dude's already becoming a star. This fight would be fantastic. I would love to see it. Chito finished him in the first fight. Sean O'Malley says it was a little bit of a fluke. Why not have them come up together? And something else I wasn't talking about, man. There would be so much craziness at this press conference. You'd have them all together, kind of like the Go Big press conference. These two barking at each other, it'd be perfect. But you want to talk about barking each other. Let's talk about the 4th fight on the main card. Oh, man. All right. Colby Chaos Covington. Could be champion. Could be not champion. Who knows? He's fighting Leon Edwards. Whether or not he wins this fight, this is a matchup that the UFC could make. Put him against Dustin Poirier. Oh, my God. The bad blood would be nuts. And plus Colby Covington and Dustin Poirier with the rest of these guys on the press conference table. Give me it. The build-up would be great. I would love to see it. And Colby would just chew him up and spit him out. Now, I'm a Dustin Poirier fan, but I mean, like, it'd be fun to see on the mic. I would imagine he'd chew him up and spit him out in the fight, too. But still, Dustin Poirier has been talking about wanting the fun fights, wanting to move up to 170. Why not pair him up against Colby Chaos Covington? They'd be better than anybody Colby could fight in the welterweight division, honestly, in my opinion. Colby has some great matchups that I would love to see him fight, like Shavkat. I would love to see that fight, and I considered making that fight. But you want to talk about the magnificent fight for UFC 300? Big press conference, big event, lots of hype. Chaos versus Poirier? Oh, give me that. Give me that fight. And Colby just going on, hey, Louisiana Swamp Trash, Dustin Poirier. He would be going crazy. He'd be going crazy. And could you imagine if Dustin knocked him out? Dustin always brings it. That would be amazing. Man, give me that fight. Give me it. I want to see it. One of my most fights that I've been looking forward to on that card. Top 3 fights, guys. Top 3 fights, and they are 3 title fights on the card. Could you imagine making 5 title fights on the card? Because Colby could be champion. Sean O'Malley could be champion. But as of right now, they're not champions. So, Zhang Weili. Who is Zhang Weili going to fight? Mackenzie Dern. There we go. Easy peasy. Zhang Weili can chew her up, spit her out, do what Weili does. I'm a big Weili fan. She would murder Mackenzie Dern. But man, Weili brings eyes to the card like we have never seen with a female champion outside of Ronda Rousey. She's great. She seems like a great person. She's a great champion. She's a great fighter. Mackenzie Dern brings eyes for a little bit of those reasons. She's an okay fighter. She looked great in her last fight against Angela Hill, actually. She looked like a very improved fighter. But she has no chance of being Weili. But this is a matchup you want to talk about again. Matchup that will get eyes. Plus Mackenzie Dern, you could say she's done enough to earn a title fight now. Weili's going to stomp her next opponent. She can stomp Mackenzie Dern too. Would love to see it. Now, guys, I need you to hear me out a little bit when it comes to the co-main event because I have Islam Makhachev, and he's going to be taking on, and I hate doing this, but I have to, the winner of Beneil Dariush versus Charles Oliveira. You can't do one or the other, and the fight's happening at the time of making this video. The fight's happening in just over a week. So there's no way I can say, oh, it's going to be Beneil. I think Beneil's going to win the fight. But Charles Oliveira, man, the rematch would drum up so much interest, and Islam just fighting in itself would bring so many eyes to the table. Dariush, if it's him, he could have his own representation coming in, one of my favorite fighters of all time. Same with Oliveira, to be honest with you. But Dariush finally getting that title shot he deserves, and this fight, Beneil versus Islam, I would love to see the scrambles those two could create. And Charles Oliveira trying to get redemption, trying to get his championship back. Charles Oliveira, a superstar in himself, he's finally becoming. Either of those fights, whether it's Beneil or Charles, would do great against Islam Makhachev. So whoever, depending on when you're watching this fight, the winner of that takes on Islam Makhachev for the co-main event. And I apologize to you that it's not a solid fight, but I feel like this is the perfect way to go about it. Plus, I thought about champions who were most likely to retain their belts, and I thought Islam and Weili were these most likely to do so. And you can't have Islam fight somebody who's not Dariush or Oliveira, you know? Main event, guys, and you saw it in the thumbnail. Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz 3. Nate Diaz, very vocal about coming back into the UFC. Conor McGregor, there is no way that dude looks the same, whether or not he wins against Michael Chandler. This is something that you could do. This is something that Conor wants. This is something that Nate wants. And besides a rematch with Conor and Khabib, unless Conor were to go up and fight Leon Edwards or Colby Covington for the welterweight strap, this is the biggest fight you could do. Again, outside of Khabib. Even if Conor went up another weight class, or even if Conor wanted to cut down and fight Volk, I feel like Nate Diaz would drum up the most interest, and it would be the biggest show for a UFC 300 card. This is the main event. This is what everybody would like to see. You can't not have Conor McGregor at the top of the card. And Conor says that he's not done after Chandler. And it looks like they're going to fight at the end of the year. It'd be perfect timing if you want to come back in the spring, take on UFC 300, fight Nate Diaz. What if they both retired too? That'd be a really wholesome moment. But to settle that trilogy is something we have all been waiting for a very long time. And I don't mind Conor's chances in it, to be honest with you. Nate looked horrible. But still. And just think about this entire card, guys. Anyways, that is the main event. But think about this entire card, whether it's just fights to look forward to as a hardcore MMA fan, fights that are for the casuals, fights like Conor McGregor, Colby Covington, people to get in everybody in the casual fan, the press conference, the promos, the trash talk online. This card has everything. And this is the best that I can come up with as of right now, as of where the fighters are, to be in next spring. No matter what happens, I feel like you could make these matchups. And you gotta do 6, 6, and 6. 6 fights on the early prelims, 6 fights on the prelims, 6 fights on the main card. This would make UFC 300 so special. Let me know what you guys thought about my picks down below. Would you change anything? If you have time, I would love to hear your full UFC 300 down below. If you have time to write it, I would really appreciate it. This is my whole point of talking in these videos, guys. I love talking to you guys, but thank you so much for watching. On the screen right now, you will have 2 fantastic Clenbat videos for you to watch if you want to continue watching the channel. Check them out. They're pretty great. I will see you there or in the next video. Take care.